Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Henry Q Wifflebottom here with you once again. Before we get started on tonight's chapter, today is Anzac Day here in Australia, and I just want to send out a big thank you to all the veterans, past and present. Just want to say, thank you for everything. Just wanted to acknowledge Anzac Day for everyone. But tonight's story, we're on to chapter 7 tonight. We finished chapter 6 with Herod mourning the death of Surinder. So, chapter 7. Selen's escape from Terranetza had an element of fortune to it, although she liked to think she was never in any real danger. She was certainly irritated that the shaman had managed to see her so easily despite the spell she had used to conceal herself, and had ducked low as the arrows flew. With the Westman advancing behind a hail of shafts, she had gathered together her concentration and cast another cloaked walk before diving through an unshuttered opening at the side of the hut in which she had been hiding and watching. Landing on hard-baked mud, she had scattered chickens as she rolled, the fowl looking on in blank confusion, sensing something but seeing nothing. She had come fluidly to her feet and had sprinted away into the forest, changing direction at the tree line and hearing the sounds of pursuit die away as she slipped unseen further and further into the forest. Several hours later, as night fell, she had held communion with Stillion before sleeping deeply under a stand of low bushes she had hollowed out to accommodate her slender frame. Selen awoke the next morning with the sun dappling her face. The forest was quiet but for the sounds of nature, and the still air warmed quickly. She set and lit a fire before recovering the rabbit from the trap she'd laid the night before, then skinned it effortlessly and spitted it for breakfast. She was on the move in less than an hour. The lands to the northwest, her direction of travel, were crawling with Westman raiding parties as the tribes sought local populations to subjugate and new areas for staging posts. As she moved quietly past encampment after encampment and saw the Westmen building calmly and carefully, she wondered at their apparent lack of urgency. It was as if they were waiting for something. She feared finding out what. As the first afternoon of her journey to the torn waste began to pale towards dusk, she felt a sudden and involuntary spasm of fear. What she found in Parv would almost certainly herald chaos throughout Belaya, and a war the scale of which hadn't been seen for over 300 years. The last time the Westmen invaded. She only hoped she could relay enough information back to Stillion before she was caught and killed, because, if Stillion was right, she wouldn't be leaving the city of the Witch Lords. Her sense of fear was quickly quashed, replaced by one of loss, and for a time she struggled with her motivation. She knew it was best if she forgot all thoughts of a return to Setesk. They might cloud her judgment, make her too careful. She substituted them with the cold desire to prove herself beyond all question Zeteska's greatest mage spy. She had never doubted. Others had, simply because she was a woman in a male-dominated order. And more than having her name exalted in her own ranks, she had the chance to achieve the ultimate sacrifice for the greater glory of Zetesk. She might even change the course of the war that was surely coming. Desire rekindled, she focused very deliberately to build her inner strength. Supple but strong leather boots covered her feet and calves, the dark matte brown colouring blending with the forest shades. Each boot carried a sheathed dagger. Mottled green trousers and jacket completed the camouflage picture. On her hands, black gloves, skin tight, with fine grips sewn into palms and fingertips. Inside the sleeves of her jacket and under those of her brown woolen shirt, a spring mechanism attached to either wrist. Locked into each was a barbed bolt fatal in close combat, but with no real range. 3 more daggers hung from her waist belt in addition to a pick set, and on her back, beneath her jacket, hung a scabbarded short sword. Her head and neck were wrapped in a long cloth scarf which, when tied for covert action, left open only the skin surrounding her large brown eyes. She kept her black hair cropped close to her head, her nails short but sharp, and her feet in perfect condition. Her body, slim and athletic, long-legged and small-breasted, was built for agility and speed, attributes she used to the full. She was fast and deadly because being clever enough to breach places undetected was only half the job. Being able to get out when the mana ran dry was the reason she survived. Stillion had quipped that she'd make a fine assassin, but personally she found the thought of killing to order abhorrent. Mind you, more than once her path had been sprinkled with the corpses of those who'd tried to stop her. Selin smiled. Maybe she would see Zetesk again after all. With care and belief, anything was possible. She was under pressure to reach Parv quickly. Knowing only one spell that would satisfy that pressure, she used it, moving off northwest through thinning trees towards increasingly mountainous and barren terrain that gave ample places to hide, but few in which to find any comfort. The western lands were characterized by sheer valleys and studded with ranges of mountains over which sudden and violent weather broke almost without warning. But for now, with the sun warming the earth, cold rocks seemed a world away. The sun was already past its zenith when the Raven rode out of Carina by the north gate, heading for the ruins of Septon's Mage House, 3 days' ride to the northwest. The morning had been taken up by Serinda's funeral, an event to which Densa was not invited. Now clear of the scene of sorrow, they rode in loose formation on the trail. Densa, drawn and sunken-eyed, was at the head with Talon and Richmond. The unknown warrior and Herod Coldheart rode together some 20 strides behind. Ilka was well adrift of them and had kept silent from the moment they saddled up. It was an hour since their exit from Carina, and Herod had been half expecting an attack, particularly from the witch hunters. The idea that they had sent only one assassin after Densa made Herod wonder what sort of organization they were, and he found himself a little disappointed in them. He was relying on their determination to see Densa dead, and as he gazed at the dark mage's back, he had to smile. It was an odd situation for sure. "Why is it Ilka dislikes Zetesk so much?" he asked, still staring at Densa. "Why don't you ask him yourself?" returned the unknown. "It's about time he joined up." He turned in his saddle and beckoned the mage to join them, but it wasn't until Herod turned to that Ilka spurred his horse forwards. As he moved closer, Herod frowned. Ilka displayed the import of Densa's revelations of the previous night in his face like a wound. He tried to smile as he joined his friends, but couldn't muster any more than a raising of the eyebrows. "Are you all right, Ilka?" asked Herod. "That's a bloody stupid question," replied Ilka. "What can I do for you two?" His voice was flat and shocked. Herod knew how he felt. "Herod was wondering what you had against Zetesk, exactly," said the unknown. "Everything," said Ilka. "But putting it simply, in magic terms, Gelatza and Zetesk disagree about all things magical. What it's for, how to research it, how to build mana stamina, everything. When we say stop, they say go. In Gelatza, it's a crime to work for the masters of Zetesk. Do you understand?" "No," said Herod. Ilka sighed. "Look, and stop me if you know this, but the reason the colleges split was largely moral, concerning the direction of research and the uses of magic that the research was leaning towards. It was also due to the methods used for gathering mana, and not to put too fine a point on it, the faction that became Zetesk found a quick way to replenish their mana that was based on human sacrifice. Now I can forgive Zetesk many things, but not that." "Do they still practice sacrifice?" asked the unknown. "According to them, no. But the fact is that the method still works despite the fact that they have found other, hardly less reprehensible methods. Anyway, the point of it all is that 2,000 years on, our law, that is, our understanding of the physics of magic, is now so divorced from Zetesk's that we can understand very little of how they construct and use spells." "So could you cast Dawnthief?" asked Herod. "I mean, it's not a Zetesk spell, is it?" "No, it isn't, and no, I can't," said Ilka. "Well, in theory I can. I know the words and law because Septon was careful to publish them to all colleges. But in reality, having done no work on the mana shape or studied the intricacies of speaking the spell, I'd be certain to fail." "So we better keep Densa alive then." Herod curled his lip. "Until we discover whether he's telling the truth or not, at least." "Yeah, until then," muttered the unknown. They fell silent for a time. Herod digested what Ilka had told him and wished he'd paid more attention to what made mages beat. More important, though, was finding out what made witch hunters beat. The two, he reflected, would be linked. "What do you know about these witch hunters, unknown?" he asked. "You didn't get much sleep last night, did you?" The unknown turned up the corners of his mouth. "Thinking was only part of it, big man." "Well?" "Not a great deal," the unknown shrugged. "Their leader is a man called Travers. He was a commander of the garrison that finally lost control of Understone Pass while we were fighting for the Race Lords up north in the early days of the Raven. He was a dangerous man, but he must be getting old by now." The unknown paused. "Ilka's your man for this, I think." Now, at least, Ilka smiled. His ears pricked and he kneaded his forehead between thumb and forefinger. "I'm an elf, unknown," he said. "It's not a great story, I'm afraid. Travers is either a shining hero waging a long war against the evils of magic, or a once great soldier who's blind to today's reality. Depends which side of the fence you're on." "And which side are you on?" Herod leaned forward in his saddle, his hands on its raised pommel, stretching his back and breathing in the smell of leather mixed with the strong odours of his horse. He found it strangely comforting. "The blind man," said Ilka. "Look, it all started out as a grand scheme and there were many people who wanted him to succeed. I was one of them. After Understone Pass, he founded a group dedicated to creating a kind of moral code which was aimed primarily at restraining the destructive magics of Zetesk and, to a lesser extent, Dordova. Not outlawing, mind. He didn't believe they should be stopped, not then, just monitored and kept to quiet research. Anyway, at that time they were called the Winged Rose and had tattoos put on their necks of a red rose head in between a pair of white wings." He stroked the left side of his neck in a circle as he spoke. "It was supposed to signify passion and freedom, I think." "Does that make sense?" asked the unknown. "Sort of," replied Ilka. "Initially their ideals were pure. It was all about their desire to see the country freed from the shadow of what they saw as dark magic, and they were going to pursue that aim without recourse to violence." "Bloody hell," breathed Herod. "Yeah, I know what you mean," said Ilka. "As you can gather, the ideals slipped by degrees, and what had been a plan for, I don't know, regulation, I suppose, became a witch hunt, and one aimed at any college's adepts Travers deemed dangerous. That, of course, now includes me, particularly since my unfortunate association with our glorious would-be leader up there." "Do they still wear this tattoo?" Herod indicated his own neck. "Not quite," said the unknown. "They've recoloured it a rather unoriginal all black now, although the motif itself is the same." "That's right," agreed Ilka. "Black Wings, they call themselves. The rose must be an embarrassment or something." "That's how I knew the woman was trouble." It was a beat before Herod realised that the unknown wasn't talking to either of them. "Damn." "What are you talking about, unknown?" asked Herod. "I recognised that tattoo, didn't I? If I'd acted sooner, I could have saved Serinda, maybe. The trouble was, for a moment when I knew she was after Denser, I had no desire to stop her. I couldn't have cared less if he lived or died, and in some ways I still can't." "Until Dawnthief came along," remarked Ilka. "If you believe that," said the unknown. "Still sceptical, are you, unknown? Still an elf, are you, Ilka?" The buildings of the Carina Trade Alliance retained the grandiose air of centuries gone by. The halls, offices, kitchens and rooms of the once proud organisation were set in gardens still tended beautifully by the city's gardeners, thanks to a legacy gifted by the 3rd Earl Arlen in recognition of the KTA's sacrifices in the First Westman Wars 300 years before. How the Arlen family's fortunes had changed since then, swallowed up by the rising power of Baron Blackthorne on the back of the new rich trade in minerals. The KTA put on a brave face for the public. A sweeping drive through ornate iron gates led to a pillared frontage, whose double doors of ebony sat within a marble frame. The main building rose 3 stories and was formed from quarried white stone, brought from the Denebray Crags some 70 miles north and east. It was inside that the cracks showed. The entrance hall was lined with standing armour, all dull and dusty. There was no money to employ the polisher anymore. Paintwork peeled, damp and mould inhabited the corner of walls, and the air was musty in the nostrils. The banqueting table was chipped, scarred and rutted, its chair fabrics torn, stuffing oozing from rents in the faded material. As for the rooms, no lord or baron would take one without a trusted bodyguard in attendance. The whole atmosphere depressed Baron Gress. His initial optimism that the meeting had been called at all disintegrated as the usual internecine bickering grew among the dozen delegates who could be bothered to attend. Lord Denebray, who had called the meeting following losses he had suffered in a Westman raid on one of his convoys inside Understone Pass itself, was the nominal chairman of the KTA, and popular belief held that he would be the last. He had contested that Tesea, the tribal lord holding the Understone Pass treaties, had broken the safe passage arrangements and that military action was necessary to keep the trade route open. But around the table, the dozen barons and lords, ranging from the white-haired, craggily old, but still powerfully built Lord Raish, and the black-bearded, bloated obscenity that was Lord Imot, to the young hawk-featured and very tall Pontus, wore their cynicism like armour. For 3 hours, futile arguments, speeches and discussions drove the delegates into two factions. Gress, Denebray, and the eldest son of Lord Jaden, whose lands lay to the north of the college cities, found themselves in an increasingly beleaguered position. Orchestrated by Pontus, Raish and Haven, resolution after resolution led to the systematic dismissal of Denebray's claims, accusations that he had triggered the skirmish, and calls for his words to be struck from the record. The culmination was a one-sided debate on how the KTA might best profit from any potential tribal unity, while the three excluded delegates sat in bewildered but furious silence. Gress, who had said little throughout, spoke only in response to a direct question from Pontus. Strangely silent, Gress. Still wondering how to pay for the damage to your castle wall, or just keeping your thoughts to yourself? My dear Pontus, replied Gress, I'm rather of the opinion that you lost the little tiff that you began, and that your wounds require significantly more licking than my own. Meanwhile, I am afraid that my thoughts do not tally with the decisions you are about to make, particularly your move to begin again the selling of arms to the Westmen. Oh dear, said Pontus, you are presumably in possession of harder facts than my lords Raish or Haven? Yes, I am, said Gress, and the respect in which he was held sobered the audience at least temporarily. The Westmen, as Denebray has been trying to intimate, could invade Beliar at any time, given the numbers I believe amassed in the heartlands even now. They are organised, strong and united, and I will be marching to the aid of Blackthorn at first light tomorrow. Really? Pontus held a smile. A costly venture. Money is nothing, said Gress. Survival is everything. There was a ripple of laughter around the table. Your fears are out of all proportions to the facts, said Lord Raish. Perhaps your age is addling your mind. For generations now, we, and I include my family in this, have lived off the ample fat of Beliar, its people and its rich resources. We have drunk in its beauty and basked in its security. Our disagreements blow away like chaff in the wind when set against the warfare that has so often torn the West apart. But no longer. There is unification, and it is us to whom their attention is turned. We stand on the brink of a fight for our lives, all of our lives, and the enemy is stronger, fitter, more numerous and better trained than we are, said Gress. Don't you see? Don't you hear what Denebray is telling you? He turned to Pontus. I would weep tears of joy on my ramparts at the sight of your men trying to take Tarrenspike Castle again. I really would. But unless we deal with the threat that affects us right now, Tarrenspike Castle will be flying a Westman standard. I would prefer to wait for these Westmen while drinking wine from your cellars, said Pontus. Beliar has such changeable weather this time of year. His words found favour with others around the table. A chuckle echoed off the walls. Laugh now, said Gress, while you can. I pity you for your blindness, and I pity Beliar too. I love this country. I love being able to look out from my castle and see the distant Blackthorn Mountains shimmering in the morning sun, the dew lifting from the pasture lands below me, and smell the freshness of the air. And I will be happy to reserve a place for your rocking chair on my ramparts, replied Pontus. I sincerely hope you are dead long before I need my rocking chair, spat Gress, and I will curse every day the fact that I am protecting your sorry hide while I and those truly loyal to this country strive to save it. He spun about and strode to the door, a tittering laugh in his ear. He paused, fingers on the handle. Think about the real reasons Blackthorn isn't here. Think about why the 4 colleges are meeting at Trivern Lake right now. And think about why the Raven are working for Zetesk, something they swore they would never do. They all want to save our country from the Westmen and our women from mothering their bastard sons. And any of you who refuse to ride to Blackthorn, Understone, or the colleges to lay your lives before the gods for Beliar will be cast down when the reckoning comes. And come it will. The banqueting hall was silent as Gress departed the KTA for the last time. As the day waned towards dusk, Dancer took the party from the main path into an area of thick woodland. He stopped when they were all well hidden from anyone riding on the trail. Once all had dismounted, Richmond set about a small fire. Dancer wandered over to his horse, put his mouth close to its ear, and pointed deeper into the woods. The brown mare ambled away in the direction Dancer's fingers indicated, followed by all the others. "Nice trick," said Richmond. "It was nothing," Dancer shrugged. He sat with his back to a tree and lit his pipe. The cat poked its head from his robes, darted to the ground and disappeared into the undergrowth. "So what's the plan, Dancer?" asked Talon, wiping out an eye smarting from the dust of the road. "It's quite simple. We think the amulet gives the location of a dimension door that will let us into Septon's workshop. We are presuming it rests in interdimensional space. Given the law on the amulet, Ilka's going to have to cast the spell to open the door." "No problem, Dancer," muttered Ilka. "I cast dimensional spells all the time." "Right," said Herod. "I've been hearing you talking about dimensions and portals for too long, and I still have no idea what you're talking about. Any chance of an explanation I can understand." Ilka and Dancer looked at each other. The Zeteskian nodded to the Gelatsan. "Actually, the concept is simple, but it takes quite a mind leap to come to terms with it at all," said Ilka. "The fact is that there are so far unknown numbers of other dimensions, worlds you'd call them, that coexist with our own. We, that is, mages in general, have identified 2, but there are clearly many more than that." "Oh, clearly," said Herod, pursing his lips. "What's the problem?" asked Ilka, his ears pricking. "I know you saw a dragon and you say it was in some other dimension, but now you're saying there are other worlds littering the place? That's what," said Talon. "Look, put it this way. We go outside, we see sky, ground and sea. Now you're asking us to believe that there are other dimensions there with us, we can't see them, and you gaily announce you even know what 2 of them are?" "Sorry, Ilka," continued Richmond, "but this has all come as rather a surprise." "Yeah," Talon again. "I mean, how the hell did anyone get the idea there could even be such things?" "Dancer?" prompted Ilka. The cat reappeared from the undergrowth and curled up in Dancer's lap, eyes on his master's face. "We think Septon always knew, though probably no one will ever know how. He was the mage who first postulated the existence of other dimensions in addition to the one we'd long known about through mana research. It seems obvious now, but at the time, Septon was shunned by the greater mage community, though he is now regarded as a genius. It was the reason he left Ordova and built his own house." "I'm none the wiser," said Herod, deadpan. "Our best guess is that something in Septon's mind made him open to the nuances of mana flow and flux that signify activity beyond our dimension. He could see and sense things no other mage ever could. He was unique," said Dancer. "Sorry to be vague, but much is missing from Septon's early work. He understood the magic required, though, and developed lore that would base spells to create dimension portals of his own, or so we have to assume." "All right," said the unknown. "So we accept dragons have a world separate to ours, that they link to us to escape, whether we like it and can get our heads around it or not. That leaves me with 2 questions. What's stopping dragons from any side of their war coming here to rule, and what's in the other dimension?" He rose and added a few branches to the fire. "Dancer, still yours." Ilka's tone was less than friendly. We know very little of the dragon dimension. No one has ever travelled there except perhaps Septon. The dragon you met, he nodded at Herod, well, we think, have been one of a large brood or family who have exclusive use of the corridor between our two dimensions. The corridor has many links to our world, one for each member of the brood and their dragonine mage. The dragons defend the corridor against attack from other broods, and what Shah Khan told you pretty much confirms that. He drank deeply and chewed his lip, considering his answer to the next question carefully. No one, he said slowly, has been able to replicate Septon's work, so there is no travel between dimensions. Finding the key to his workshop may well lead to our making great strides in change to all that. In Zetesk, we know a good deal about interdimensional space based on Septon's writings, and it's where we launched the Witch Lords' cage. We have also found evidence of other dimensions, but we've only penetrated one. But it was the only one you really needed, wasn't it, Denser? Ilka's face held an expression of deep distaste. We certainly found it to be useful, yes, replied Denser testily. Please share this knowledge. The unknown's voice suggested it was not a request. In simple terms, it's a dimension inhabited by what you'd call demons, but don't get too excited, said Denser. They can't live in this dimension without extensive, modification and continuous help from a mage. Denser's hand reached out and stroked his cat absently. The animal purred and stretched. Why not? Asked Richmond. Because they exist on mana. It is the air they breathe, and the concentration of mana here isn't even close to being enough. Likewise, we could not live there. What the test does, I will freely admit, is tap this demon dimension for mana. And that's bad, is it, Ilka? Richmond turned to the Gelatson. It's not so much the use of the mana, but the methods used to make the opening. There's no point going into them now, it's a moral thing. The group fell silent, each man taking in, or trying to, what he had heard so far. Excuse me. To Herod, it was all so much bluster and babble. He'd asked the first question, but he'd barely taken in that answer, and he wasn't sure he understood, or cared if he didn't. He couldn't concentrate, his mind continually wandering to dreams and images of surrender, while his heart told death in his chest. Have you heard enough? Asked Denser. One more question. Richmond was frowning. Where are these other dimensions in relation to our own? I mean, I can see the stars. Are those what you are talking about? No, said Denser, a half smile touching his lips, although it's not a bad analogy. Day to day, there is no hint or clue where other dimensions lie. The easiest way I can describe it is to ask you to consider a void more vast than you can possibly imagine, and then populate it with bubbles, a possibly infinite number, each representing a single dimension. Then, and here's the tricky part, imagine the bubbles being everywhere and nowhere at the same time, so that no matter the number of bubbles and the vastness of the void, there is no distance between each bubble, making travel between them theoretically instantaneous, subject to certain alignment criteria. He paused. Does that sound right, Ilka? It tallies with my understanding, such as it is, said Ilka, though his face suggested he'd learned something new. So how come the dragon had the amulet? Asked Helen. Good question, said Denser. Shortly after Septon announced the text for Dawnthief, he disappeared. We're guessing he went through his dragonine portal or one of his own. We had to assume that Septon meant us to have his findings one day, and it made sense that, as a dragonine, he would entrust the effective key to it all, this amulet, to the dragons and let them decide when we were ready. We just got one step ahead, that's all. Anything else? There was silence. Good, we'll set off at first light. Here he glared at the dark mage who was searching a pocket. Let me make something very clear, Denser, said the barbarian evenly, fetching a dagger from his belt and testing its edge. He stared studiously at the short blade. You are not in charge here. If the members of the Raven agree, we will travel to this mage workshop of yours, and not before. Denser smiled. If that's the way you want to play it. No, Denser, said Herod. That's just the way it is. The moment you forget is the moment you're on your own, or dead. And Belial would die with me, said Dancer. Yeah, well, we only have your word for that, said the unknown. Herod nodded. Dancer looked confused. But I'm the only one who knows what we have to do, he said. For now, said the unknown. But don't worry, when we understand, we'll have more to say about how we go about things. Be sure. There was quiet. Richmond's fire crackled and a breeze rustled the upper branches. Night was all but on them. Dancer knocked the bowl of his pipe against the roots of the tree. If I might make a suggestion for discussion, he said slowly, I think it's time we got some sleep. And that's the end of chapter 7 for tonight. So, hope you enjoyed the latest chapter in Dawnthief by James Barclay. Join us again in a couple of nights' time for chapter 8. We're coming up to some major things happening along the storyline there, so I hope you tune in for that one. Look, join us any time in the storyline you like. However, I do suggest you go back and go from chapter 1. Please leave us a like, a comment, suggestion, share the videos, do whatever you want. I don't care. Thank you. Check out our other series, The Dark Tower by Stephen King, still on volume 1. So, tonight's music recommendation, a very kick-ass Aussie band, FRANKENBOK, guys from Melbourne. This album's a few years old. It's called The Last Ditch Redemption. Check out the title track, Last Ditch Redemption, and the other song called Dig. So, alright. Again, hope you enjoyed tonight's reading, and this is Henry Q Wifflebottom signing off.